Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. Welcome to another episode of the Market Access podcast. And I'm delighted today that I have a great guest today from Switzerland, Bernie Bichsel. I would say he is one of the most experienced voices in European Medtech regulation, which is the, let's say, plus before what we do, reimbursement and pricing. I think just generally, whoever does not know Bernie yet, I think he has seen the regulatory system from both sides. For many years, he led the medical devices division at Swissmedic, where he was directly involved in regulatory oversight, MDR implementation, and interaction with European authorities. Today, as a co-CEO and co-owner of ISS in Switzerland, he advises Medtech and IVD companies from startups to global players on regulatory strategy, market entry, compliance, and lifecycle management. I think having said that, I would say we have a great guest today to really try to bridge now between regulatory and market access. And of course, Bernie, we both sit in Europe. So first of all, welcome to the show. And then secondly, we can jump into the details of the questions.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Stefan. So the pressure is already on, so I have to deliver today, right? So maybe one thing I would like to add here, I was also during my time at Swissmedic a member of the MDCG. As an observer status, Switzerland had at that time. So I was really there at the beginning when the new MDR and IVDR regulation came up. And maybe also for the audience who is listening to this podcast, Stefan asked me to give you a bit insights about this system. And of course, we will have a strong focus on Europe, but it may also be that I will touch on some other regions on the globe.
Absolutely. And I think a lot, or hopefully a lot, can also be transferred from one region to the other. That's not 100%, but at least some of those things, right?
Well, the right answer, it's not just for consulting, Stefan, but also for regulatory affairs. It depends, right? So it cannot be one-to-one transferred, but of course, depending on the region, you may have the opportunity to transfer some parts, especially if it comes to very technical parts. Then you don't have to redo everything, but everybody has his speciality. And what we observe in a global context is also due to the political situation, the regions, they tend to build new, let's say, walls is maybe a very strong word, but they tend to do their own thing and being more independent.
Very good. No, I agree. But maybe we start a bit earlier, because that's also my kind of experience. That's, I think, also where we started some of our discussions. I mean, if I speak with either, say, medtech companies, which are not based or not yet based in Europe, or especially, of course, when I speak with medtech startups, I think a key question, what I'm being asked, and I cannot give the right answer because we just get into the discussion the step after, is a lot of times, how do I realistically get my medical device into the European market? So what are the kind of key drivers which might make myself, let's say, successful, to make it maybe simple?
Mm-hmm.
I know the answer is probably not that easy, but maybe you can give a bit of a frame, Benny.
Yeah, I can do that. But maybe let me start with a very short history about the medical device regulation. So if you compare medical devices with medicinal products, then we have two main differences if we look back. So medicinal products, they have a much longer regulatory history. They have maybe 120, 130 years of regulation. Medical devices, especially IVDs, is even worse. They have been regulated in Europe around 1990, 1993, 1998. So it's a very young regulation. And it's a big difference between those two regulations. With medicinal products, you have like a national authority who gives you the market access, the authorization that you are allowed to go on the market. The positive thing with medical devices, it's all with you as a legal manufacturer. So it's your responsibility. But as we can see, a lot of responsibility also means that you need to take the decision. And now coming to your question, what is the key factor to be successful? I would say, especially for startups, it's absolutely necessary that you take all the regulatory costs and timeline into account for your business plan. I'm also active as a Swiss special coach, and I have the great honor to support a lot of startups on the regulatory path. And I would say that's absolutely key because it's a highly regulated environment. It means you need a high investment to go on the market, and this has to be calculated for your pricing.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I can just touch base again on that. I think a key point, what I also hear a lot of times, is the timelines. So people are, especially, let's say, saying, or let's say, people from outside of let's say within the industry, it takes ages until we get approval in Europe. Is that true, or is that rather not?
Well, it depends again. It depends again, Stefan. Well, there are different timelines you have to consider. Let's start with the engineering process. So first of all, you have to develop a product. This takes time. Then I would say the timing, which is talked about very often, is the MDR, IVDR bottleneck. Mm-hmm. When Europe brought this new regulation, then they didn't do a grandfathering, which means all existing devices and new devices had to go through this conformity assessment again. So this caused a bottleneck at the so-called notified bodies who are performing for you this conformity assessment. But today, after now a few years, we can clearly say those bottleneck is resolved. So notified body reacted dynamically to this situation. They built up new capacity. It even happened that some of them had to reduce capacity over the last 2 years. So this bottleneck is solved. But nevertheless, if you need clinical evidence, and especially if you need a clinical investigation, sometimes you may also hear the term clinical study, clinical trial, which are for this podcast basically synonyms. Then, of course, the timeline will be much, much longer because to generate this clinical evidence usually takes a lot of time.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And it also there depends, right? I mean, which kind of product you have in mind. I mean, how long and how many patients you might have to be, let's say, included, which endpoint to take, etc. But I think very important, because I heard that as well a lot of time, was that kind of bottleneck, what you just described, where you would just generally say, yeah, that's probably solved in the meantime. I would like to move a bit further. If we would just assume a company is successful from a regulatory perspective, of course, let's say the overall, let's say, relationship with the regulator is probably not yet gone. It is probably never gone, right? I just want to go a bit into the direction of, let's say, claims and promotions, or to make it very simple. What are you actually allowed to say?
Yeah, that's a very, very good one. And it's also getting more important. It's a question which is getting more importance in the market, because also the medical device market is much more competitive than a few years ago. So basically, the regulation is quite simple. You can claim what you can prove. But now the complicated part is what I just said before. You need clinical evidence. So if you want to claim that your device is healing cancer or is better than other products, then you need to have clinical evidence that this device really performs what your claim says. And I would say that's the challenge, because the marketing department very often wants to have very strong claims.
Yeah.
And on the regulatory side, also in terms of having less costs and shorter development time, you try to minimize the investment on the clinical part. And this is a contradiction that has to be resolved. And good and competitive companies, they start this discussion between marketing, clinical and regulatory people very early in the development process.
Yeah. I mean, which makes a lot of sense. And I mean, this is also then making it probably a bit more difficult for, let's say, the first movers, right? I mean, if you get in there and you have maybe your claim and you go into the market and, somebody basically sees the benefits of it. The clinical benefits, and maybe then is launching a bit later. They might have another claim where you might as well be basically more or less able to deliver as well, but you cannot claim it, right? Because you have not proven it. Or is that, let's say, as well a bit of link between, let's say, similar kind of product? Can you link it from one product type in a way to another? Or is it dedicated to what you on your own have proven?
Yeah. So actually, let's take a step backwards. If we now take a global view on this question. So globally said, it's usually easier if a product is already on the market. For example, in the US, you have then a different regulatory pathway, how you can enter to the market. And usually those pathways are much easier than if you're very, very innovative and you are the first mover. So having said that, there is not a direct link to the claims. So generally, being the second mover can be very positive in terms of regulatory burden for the market access. If we are talking about claims for first and second movers, then of course claims, I would differentiate two cases. One case is there are studies available which are publicly available. Then you can refer to this public available data. And then, of course, as a fast follower, you have an advantage compared to the first mover. But of course, there might also be evidence which is then confidential and a part of your tech file. And then there's no big difference. It means you need to generate this data on your own anyway. There is one way that is often, companies often try to use this way, that they go onto the market with a limited claim setting, and then they start to generate additional clinical data afterwards in the so-called post-market phase. And then later on, they extend their claims and then their intended purpose, which is basically a good move and leads me back to your very, very beginning question. What makes a company a successful company? I would say in the medical device field, if you can do stepwise approach, even though we like to have it perfect from the beginning as Europeans, then I would say the stepwise approach is probably the smarter one.
Yeah, well, that's a very good one. Also, going back to, let's say, the very early question, making a lot of sense. I would like to go back again, just one step again. Let's say, probably more from a procedural perspective. And you just said, we Europeans. I mean, we Europeans, not myself, but the general Europeans, like our regulations, right? And I mean, there was also, let's say, I just call it the EU Omnibus package, right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe just quickly explain what that is? And then I think the key questions, of course, as well there, is it a threat or relief for Medtech? And maybe even differentiate between, let's say, SME startups or maybe as well the big manufacturers.
Maybe before we start on Omnibus, Stefan, which is a very political question, by the way, let us ask the question, why did we change the regulation on medical devices in Europe?
Good question.
And we had the first regulations in the 1990s. The Medical Device Directive, the Directive for Active Implantable Devices, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Directives. So basically, those directives, they were really good. They were very innovative. They let also a lot of freedom to all countries how they have to implement it. Having been a part of the market surveillance, I can tell you it was never a problem of the regulation, but the execution was badly made, which means we had some scandals and we had really bad products on the market as well. And what does politics do if they see scandals? They sharpen the regulation instead of making a better execution of the existing regulation. Nevertheless, there were also, of course, some fields that they needed an update. I mean, digital products, which were not very widely spread early 90s, or nanomaterials was not a big deal at that time. So we had a lot of improvement over the last 20 years. So an update was necessary. But together with the scandals, they made a huge and very rigid framework called MDR and IVDR. And now coming to your Omnibus question, what politics probably did underestimate was the impact of the industry. Medtech industry was compared with pharma industry. And if you have a look there, you have probably 80% big players, 20% small and medium. Medtech is directly the opposite, which means that the regulatory burden for small and medium companies is huge. The impact is much higher. And now what is starting to happen, and I must say that very clearly because it concerns me, we are running to shortages in certain fields because the companies cannot take the burden and they are starting to reduce their product portfolio. One point. And second point, they are starting to reduce their innovation, which means we do not have a direct negative impact now, but it means maybe in 5 or 10 years, we will have less innovative devices on the market, which could probably save lives.
Yeah, exactly. And here we see as well the link how regulation can have an impact on the every single individual, right?
True.
Especially in our area.
And in our area, the weakest population is hit by this. These are the kids. These are people with disease which are very rare, rare disease. And Omnibus aims to relieve the regulation, but it's not only for medical devices, but it also includes that. So right now, I'm still very careful, Stefan, what I say about Omnibus because we are still in this political process. And when I learned one thing in Brussels, don't run around. Listen, they launch the process and then take your time. It will take time to deregulate, and we will assess the impact if it's time. I think I saw a lot of posts on LinkedIn and comments, and well, we are still waiting. We are observing. I think there are some good ideas how you could release the burden a little bit. Also, some parts which I think, sometimes it's not just the regulation; it's also the fact that you need consistency. Huh? Also, if you do an investment as a startup over 6 years, you need to be able to plan. If you change the regulation every 2 years, that's a disaster. And I've heard venture capitalists that told me, listen, I know it's cheaper to start in Europe, but we go to US because there I know what is expected. And Europe is changing all the time.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's, I heard that as well. I'm totally with you. I think at the end of the day, you need certainty. You need certainty for the investment now. You need kind of certainty. Future is anyway uncertain, but at least kind of certainty on the regulation, on the frames of it, that you can as well at least plan to go there, right? Because there's already a lot of further uncertainty on your label, on the medical and the clinic kind of benefits based on the evidence, all of that kind of stuff, right? You never know whether you will be successful, but if you are successful from a clinical or evidence perspective, you should at least know already that whatever you have done so far can be implemented from regulatory / market access perspective. And I think if the rules are changing regularly, it's very difficult, of course.
Yeah. So I think that generally, I would say I'm positive that the EU does the Omnibus package. The main idea behind is something I can support, having seen a lot of, I would say, tendency to maybe a bit over-regulate things. But the way they proceeded and also on the AI Act, I mean, it's not even fully implemented and you are starting to change again. I mean, this is not a good way of bringing rules to the stakeholders.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's maybe as well different culture, right? I mean, a lot, or let's say, at least generally, I think in the US, you maybe let the market rule a lot of things, which, I'm an economist, so I can quite well live with it. I think in Europe, it's maybe the other way around, right? Where you rather think you need to regulate everything and down to the little kind of nitty gritty, that it really works. Where I guess, of course,
but
as well needs frames, but
But Stefan, I think there is the biggest achievement from the European Union nobody talks about. It's the new and global approach. Because this system, this conformity assessment system, is exactly what you're saying. It's not regulated to all details. You're working with standards. You should apply, but you can also deviate if you can explain why. And basically, this is a major achievement nobody talks about. And I fully agree with the new framework where you have regulation. We are rather back to the old approach where you try to regulate everything in every detail, and due to the complexity, it's just not possible. And now, being a Swiss citizen, I would say I'm allowed to make the following comment. I'm used to vote on everything. And sometimes I agree with the voting and sometimes I don't. But we have a decision.
Yeah.
In Europe, this consensus system, it is somehow very nice, but it leads to the situation you make the paragraph longer and longer until nobody disagrees.
Yeah.
Which means that if Spain would like to have this comment here, and Germany this one, and Ireland this one, and Romania this one, you just add all four of them to one, and then it's really heavy. Yeah. So that's also due to political history, but I think that's something that at the end, in the execution of the laws, it slows down the whole process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have described quite nicely all of the different kind of, let's say, changes in the past, maybe some which are still ongoing, some which might maybe as well come in the future. just structurally, again, going back a bit to the differentiation of the different sizes of the companies, would you think that all of those kind of, well, let's say the current environment would rather benefit the bigger or the smaller companies or the startups? Is there anything where you can just say, there's maybe a benefit for one or the other? Or would you, again, and I agree, I would probably agree with that answer, that you say it depends, but if it depends on what depends?
To be very frank here, I would say the higher regulation benefits the big ones. Because if you have a strong regulatory department with, let's say, 30 people, and you have a few more regulations you have to implement, you already have a department that can take care of that. Maybe you will then have 31. But if you are 150 a company with 150 employees and you have to fulfill a lot of new regulations, then the impact, the cost impact is much higher. And what we shouldn't underestimate, Stefan, is we are today talking about market access, pricing, and regulatory and clinical topics. But the EU starts to regulate a lot of other things as well. I mean, data protection, then you have all those supply chain topics, sustainability. You have to catch up with all these rules. And the speed they are implementing on this new regulation is very, very high for mid-sized company, especially if you see the other challenges on the globe. I mean, other markets, they start to build walls. Other they give you tariffs on the top without naming any countries here. But so that's the new reality, and industry has to deal with it. I would say I'm very proud of the industry we are having, because the medical device industry is doing a great job in this very difficult environment. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm in consulting, we can see it. They are suffering. Our clients are suffering from this very, very high burdens.
Yeah, no, I think it's a perfect bridge towards the end of that discussion. I mean, you just mentioned the kind of current, not only the geopolitical environment, but also the economic environment, right? Where at least in Europe, but I think I would even say globally. But how attractive would you still see, let's say, Europe for medtech investment compared with maybe other countries outside of Europe? And if you, let's say, think a bit about non-EU, let's say, strategies or countries, which regions would you see as rather promising?
Yeah, that's a very good one. I would say, even though I was also a bit negative on the regulation, I would still say Europe is very much ahead with a lot of innovation. I give you some reasons why we are strong in Europe, and I include Great Britain, and I include Norway, and I include Switzerland to this European market, just to be clear. So I'm talking about Europe and not the European Union only. If you have a look on the high schools, the universities, the quality of the engineers, and also the regulatory stuff we are having in Europe, we have a clear advantage. I would say we are really a really strong region. We have also a very strong association with Medtech Europe, which really cares about and is doing a great job here in order to make innovation still possible in order to help patients in Europe. So that's the very positive environment. Second, I would say the company structure we are having in Europe with this small and medium enterprise is also very good, because I would say the smaller are usually a bit faster and a bit more innovative than the very big ones. You can see this with the medicinal products. The very big ones, they tend to buy the patents from the smaller ones, because innovation is more difficult in a very, very big company. Very often, of course, you have a lot of exceptions. I would also say, if you have a look on the demographic shift in Europe, Europe is still also, from a market point of view, a very attractive market. it's still a very big single market. So I would also say the healthcare system is well developed, and therefore it really makes sense to be present on the market in Europe. The challenge here is that, but maybe you know more about the reimbursement part than me, you have still very, very national systems in place, and that's a bit the challenge.
Yeah.
Other regions which I think are interesting, US is still the biggest healthcare market. It still is. China, of course, and India. And what I also observe, I would say the whole Arabic region is heavily underestimated, in my opinion. And I would say in the upcoming years might be one of the regions which could have one of the fastest growths.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I like to, let's say, end every podcast with a positive spin, and I think you made it greatly, because I think you basically put everything into I also think the right perspective, right? Europe is still there. Yes, with their challenges, but I think there are also a lot of big benefit. But at the same time, which is also good for the industry, we have further regions developing, or also, let's say, which should be considered. And I think this is good for the industry. And finally, I think that's also good for innovation and hence for patients. Bernie, thanks a lot. That was a lot of good insights. I learned as well a lot. So thank you again, and maybe have you as well back on the show in the future as well.
Thank you very much, Stefan. It was a pleasure having this talk with you.
Regulation in Europe as a key topic for today. And as Bernie has as well said a couple of times, regulation is important, but the execution is probably the more important consideration. Yes, we have quite a good number of those regulations across Europe, but not only there, also in other parts of the world. And I think important is as well to keep probably as well in mind the positives of the market. The regulation needs to be taken into account. Bernie said that very early on in terms of timing and budget. Keep also in mind that, let's say that there is a bottleneck from a timing perspective because of the new regulations across Europe is nowadays a myth. Of course, it has been true a couple of months and years ago. Additionally, something keeping in mind is what Bernie just mentioned very briefly, and was basically bringing back the ball to market access, is that we have in Europe different kind of regulations for market access, so different processes per country. To put that a bit into perspective, very important, we have developed market access and healthcare systems across Europe. And if you, for example, take the US as well into considerations, it's also not only one market in a way from a reimbursement perspective, but it's a very complex one. You have the different kind of states, you have the different kind of health insurances as well, which all as well have different regulations and processes. So as well need to be taken into considerations. Ultimately, very important, regulation from a regulatory perspective and market access need to be taken into consideration very early on from a planning, budget timing perspective, and also from a claims perspective, so messaging perspective, meaning which kind of clinical evidence should and would I need to be basically developing in order then to communicate as well what I want to say on the market to payers, patients, and of course as well, physicians. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.